The transmission arrived on a Tuesday morning, crackling through the deep space receivers of the Luna station with the desperation of a dying species. Ambassador Tell of the Kelvari Confederation spoke in broken standard, his voice trembling as static distorted his words across the vast emptiness between stars. Please, anyone who receives this message, we are the Kelvari. We are dying. The Nexari swarm consumes everything in their path. They have taken 17 of our worlds in the past solar cycle. We have tried to fight, but we are scientists, explorers, builders. We are not warriors. Please, if there are any who might help us. The message continued for 3 hours, detailing the horrors of the Nexari invasion. Bioengineered monsters that devoured entire ecosystems, converting organic matter into more soldiers for their endless swarm. Worlds stripped bare, populations consumed, civilizations reduced to barren rock in mere months. Director Kane of the Earth Defense Council sat in the emergency session chamber, watching the holographic display show the Nexari advance. Red markers indicated conquered systems, spreading like an infection across the spiral arm. The Kelvari had lost half their territory in just 2 years. They're heading toward the core worlds, Admiral Torres observed, her weathered face grim. If they maintain this pace, they'll reach the galactic trade routes within 5 years. After that, they'll eventually reach us, Kane finished. He studied the data streams flowing past his terminal. Population figures, resource, assessments, military capabilities. The Kelvari had been peaceful for over 1,000 years. Their ships were designed for exploration and trade, not warfare. Their weapons were meant for asteroid mining and construction, not battle. The Nexari, by contrast, lived only for conquest and consumption. Their ships were grown rather than built, living vessels that healed from damage and adapted to enemy tactics. Their ground forces could survive in any environment, reproduce rapidly, and showed no fear of death because they possessed no individual consciousness beyond the collective drive to consume. The Galactic Council is paralyzed, reported General Nash from the Intelligence Division. 12 species have pledged aid to the Kelvari, but their combined military assets wouldn't slow the Nexari advance by more than a few months. They're asking for volunteers, but no one wants to commit their full forces to what looks like a losing battle. Kane leaned back in his chair, processing the implications. Humanity had only joined the galactic community 50 years ago, and they were still considered newcomers by most species. Earth's military was designed primarily for defending the solar system, with only a small expeditionary force for deep space operations. But something about the Kelvari's plea resonated with every human who heard it. Perhaps it was the desperation in Tell's voice, or the detailed descriptions of families torn apart as their worlds burned. Perhaps it was the realization that if the Nexari weren't stopped, humanity would eventually face the same fate. Sir, Admiral Torres said quietly, we have to respond to this. It's not just about the Kelvari anymore. This is about stopping a threat to all sentient life in the galaxy. Kane nodded slowly. The weight of the decision pressed down on him as he looked around the chamber at Earth's military leadership. They were about to commit humanity to a war, unlike anything they had ever faced, against an enemy that had never been defeated. Send a response to the Kelvari, he ordered. Tell them help is coming. Within hours of Kane's decision, Earth entered a state of mobilization not seen since the resource wars of the previous century. The message that went out to every human colony, every space station, every ship in the void, was simple and direct. Humanity was going to war. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Captain Rex of the merchant vessel Lucky Strike was hauling ice from the asteroid belt when the call came through. Without hesitation, he changed course for Mars shipyards, volunteering his ship and crew for military conversion. Across the solar system, similar scenes played out as civilian vessels reported for duty. Dr. Lisa Vega, director of the Terraform Research Institute, received the mobilization order while analyzing atmospheric data from Kepler 442b. She immediately redirected her entire team to weapons research, knowing that humanity's survival might depend on finding new ways to fight an enemy that adapted to conventional tactics. The industrial capacity of human space was staggering when focused on a single goal. Asteroid mining operations were converted, to produce military-grade hull plating. Agricultural stations began growing combat rations and medical supplies. The ring factories around Jupiter worked around the clock, churning out weapons, ammunition, and equipment. Admiral Torres stood on the observation deck of the Armstrong shipyard, watching as the first wave of Earth's response took shape. The sight was magnificent and terrifying. Hundreds of ships filled the construction bays, from massive dreadnoughts bristling with railguns to sleek destroyers designed for hit-and-run tactics. "The Kelvari sent us their complete tactical database on the Nexari," reported Colonel Yates, Torres's chief intelligence officer. "It makes for disturbing reading. The enemy adapts faster than any biological system should be able to. They learn from every engagement, share that knowledge instantly across their entire force." Torres nodded, still watching the shipyard work. "Then we'll have to be unpredictable. How's Project Darwin coming along?" "Dr. Vega's team has some promising results. They're calling it evolutionary warfare, weapons and tactics designed to change constantly, preventing the enemy from adapting to any single approach." The human military doctrine that emerged was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. While other species built standardized fleets with uniform tactics, humanity embraced chaos and variety. No two human ships were identical. Each crew was encouraged to develop their own modifications, their own tactics, their own approach to combat. The Kelvari had provided star charts showing the safest route to their space, but Admiral Torres chose a different path. The human fleet would approach through the neutral zone, where long-range sensors couldn't track their movements. It would add weeks to their journey, but it would preserve the element of surprise. President Walsh addressed the combined fleets via quantum communication as they prepared to depart. Her words were broadcast to every ship, every crew member, every soldier about to journey into the unknown. "You carry with you the hopes of not just humanity, but of every peaceful species in this galaxy," she said. "The Nexari believe that might makes right, that the strong can devour the weak without consequence. Today, we prove them wrong. Today, we show them what happens when predators pick on someone who can fight back." The departure was witnessed by millions. Streams of light erupted from jump points throughout the solar system as human ships engaged their faster-than-light drives. Within hours, the largest military force in human history was racing toward the galactic core, toward a war that would determine the fate of countless worlds. Behind them, Earth's factories continued their work. This was just the first wave. Humanity was preparing for total war, and they would not stop until either the Nexari were defeated or human space was reduced to ash. The journey to Kelvari space would take 3 weeks. 3 weeks to prepare, to train, to ready themselves for an enemy unlike any they had ever faced. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when humans were pushed too far. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Belvac system, the outermost Kelvari world still under siege. What they found defied every tactical manual in human military history. The Nexari swarm surrounded the planet like a living cloud of death. Millions of organisms drifted through space, from small scout creatures the size of fighters to massive bioships that dwarfed human dreadnoughts. They moved with purpose, coordinated by some invisible signal that allowed perfect synchronization across the entire force. "Sweet mother of," Captain Dale whispered from the bridge of the UES Retribution. He'd served in 3 colonial conflicts, but nothing had prepared him for this sight. Admiral Torres studied the tactical display with cold calculation. The Nexari weren't just attacking the planet, they were farming it. Massive tendrils extended from their bioships to the surface, drawing up organic matter to fuel their reproduction. Even as the human fleet watched, new Nexari creatures were budding from the larger vessels, ready to join the swarm. "All ships, maintain formation," Torres commanded. "Prepare for engagement pattern Delta 7. Remember, these things adapt quickly. We hit hard, we hit fast, and we don't give them time to learn our tactics." The first salvo from the human fleet was devastating. Railgun slugs moving at significant fractions of light speed tore through Nexari bioships, while missile barrages created expanding spheres of destruction in the swarm's ranks. For a moment, it seemed like the enemy would be swept away by human firepower. Then the Nexari adapted. The surviving bioships began secreting some kind of metallic coating, deflecting railgun impacts. Others released clouds of spores that interfered with missile guidance systems. Within minutes, weapons that had been completely effective were reduced to marginal utility. "They're learning faster than our projections indicated," Colonel Yates reported from the Fleet Command ship. "Estimated adaptation time is now under 10 minutes for any single weapon system." But Torres had expected this. "Execute Protocol Chaos. All ships switch to randomized engagement patterns. No unit is to use the same tactic twice in succession." What followed was unlike any battle in recorded galactic history. Human ships broke formation and began operating independently, each captain employing different weapons, different approaches, different strategies. The destroyer Valiant used its mining lasers to cut through Nexari carapaces while launching nuclear torpedoes. The cruiser Defiance released swarms of automated drones programmed with thousands of different attack patterns. The Nexari swarm writhed and twisted, trying to adapt to the chaotic human assault. But every time they adjusted to counter one tactic, the humans switched to something completely different. Some ships rammed the bio-vessels directly, their reinforced hulls punching through organic armor. Others used electromagnetic pulse weapons to disrupt the creature's nervous systems. Captain Rex, commanding the converted freighter Lucky Strike, discovered that standard cargo containers filled with industrial explosives were surprisingly effective against Nexari cluster formations. His ship danced through the swarm, dropping improvised bombs and using its mining equipment to devastating effect. The battle raged for 6 hours. When the last Nexari bioship was destroyed, the human fleet had suffered 12% casualties, losses that would have crippled most galactic militaries. But they had achieved something unprecedented. They had defeated a Nexari swarm. The rescue of Belvac's survivors revealed the true horror of Nexari occupation. The planet's surface was scarred by massive feeding structures, and less than 10% of the original population remained alive in underground shelters. Ambassador Tell was among the survivors, and his reaction to seeing human ships in orbit was one of stunned disbelief. "You came," he whispered over the communication channel. "We sent our plea to hundreds of worlds, hundreds of species. Only humanity answered." Torres stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking down at the ravaged world below. The Nexari had consumed everything. Forests, oceans, even the atmosphere was thinner than it should have been. This was what awaited every world in the galaxy if the swarm wasn't stopped. "Ambassador Tell," she said, "this is just the beginning. We're going to push these things back to whatever hole they crawled out of. But we need to know everything. Every world they've taken, every tactic you've tried, every weakness you've observed." The data transfer took hours. Star charts showing 17 conquered Kelvari worlds, tactical reports from doomed defensive fleets, civilian accounts of the horror of Nexari occupation. It painted a picture of an enemy that seemed unstoppable. But Admiral Torres smiled as she reviewed the intelligence. The Nexari were about to learn that humans didn't just fight to win. They fought to utterly destroy anything that threatened their friends. 3 months into the campaign, the war had transformed both sides. The Nexari, for all their adaptability, followed predictable patterns rooted in biological imperatives. They consumed, they reproduced, they expanded. Their tactics evolved within narrow parameters defined by their nature. Humanity had no such limitations. Dr. Vega's mobile research lab, the converted cargo hauler Breakthrough, had become the most important ship in the human fleet. Her team worked around the clock, analyzing captured Nexari specimens and developing new ways to kill them. What they discovered changed everything. "The individual organisms are nearly mindless," she explained to Admiral Torres during their weekly briefing. "They're controlled by distributed biological networks. Think of them as living computers that coordinate the swarm's behavior. But here's the interesting part. The network has limits." The holographic display showed a Nexari bioship, its internal structure revealed through detailed scans. Glowing nodes throughout the creature's body pulsed with synchronized patterns, creating a biological internet that linked every organism in the swarm. "Maximum effective range is approximately 50,000 kilometers, Vega continued. Beyond that, the organisms revert to basic instinctual behavior. We've been fighting them at close range, where they're at their most coordinated." Torres leaned forward, studying the data. "So, if we can force them to spread out, they become much less effective. We've already tested it in the Moravec system. Captain Dale's squadron used hit-and-run tactics to draw the swarm across a much wider area. The Nexari response time dropped dramatically. This revelation led to the development of new human tactics that exploited the enemy's coordination limitations. Long-range missile barrages forced the Nexari to disperse or take heavy casualties. When they compressed their formations for better coordination, concentrated nuclear strikes devastated their ranks. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. Engineer Tom Hayes, working on battlefield repairs to the destroyer Relentless, made a discovery that would reshape the entire war. The ship had been damaged in a skirmish, its hull breached by Nexari acid weapons. As Hayes worked to seal the breach, he noticed something strange about the damaged metal. The Nexari acid hadn't just corroded the hull. It had created a crystalline structure that seemed to interfere with biological processes. "It's like the metal remembers being attacked," Hayes explained to Captain Sarah Kim. "The molecular structure has changed, and it's actively hostile to organic compounds now." Within weeks, human engineers had reverse-engineered the process. Weapons coated with the modified metal didn't just wound Nexari organisms. They infected them, spreading crystalline formations that disrupted biological functions. The Nexari tried to adapt, but the crystalline infection attacked at the molecular level, faster than biological systems could respond. The liberation of Kelvari Prime demonstrated humanity's tactical evolution. The planet was the Confederation's capital world, home to 6 billion Kelvari and the center of their civilization. The Nexari had been consuming it for 8 months, turning the once beautiful world into a hellscape of organic towers and feeding pits. Admiral Torres deployed her forces in a pattern that would have seemed suicidal just months earlier. Instead of concentrating the fleet for maximum firepower, she spread human ships across the entire system, forcing the Nexari swarm to choose between defending multiple targets or allowing some to escape. The enemy chose to fight, just as Torres had predicted. The Nexari swarm stretched itself across the system, its coordination degraded by distance. Individual bioships found themselves facing human vessels equipped with crystalline weapons, electromagnetic pulse generators, and a dozen other specialized systems designed to exploit specific Nexari weaknesses. Captain Rex, now commanding a heavily modified assault carrier, led the attack on the planet's surface. His ship deployed thousands of combat drones, each programmed with different tactics and armed with different weapons. The Nexari ground forces tried to adapt, but they were facing too many variables changing too quickly. The battle for Kelvari Prime lasted 4 days. When it ended, the planet was free, and the Nexari had suffered their first major defeat in over a century of conquest. More importantly, human forces had captured intact Nexari bioships and command organisms, providing Dr. Vega with the samples she needed for the next phase of the war. As human medics worked alongside Kelvari survivors to tend to the wounded, Admiral Torres received a priority message from Earth. The second wave of the human fleet had arrived at the edge of Kelvari space, bringing reinforcements and new weapons based on the latest research. But more significantly, other species were finally taking notice. The galactic community was beginning to understand that the humans weren't just fighting a defensive war. They were systematically dismantling the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. The turning point came not with a single battle, but with a decision that horrified the galaxy's peaceful species and changed the nature of warfare forever. Admiral Torres stood before the Joint Command Council, which now included representatives from 6 different species, and outlined humanity's final strategy. "We're not going to push them back," she announced. "We're going to follow them home and kill every last one of them." The holographic star map showed the Nexari expansion over the past century, tracing their path of destruction back toward the galactic rim. Dr. Vega's analysis of captured bioships had revealed something crucial. The Nexari weren't native to this galaxy. They were an invasive species that had arrived from dark space between galaxies, and their home base was still out there, breeding new swarms. "The specimens we've captured show genetic markers indicating a common origin point," Vega explained. "Approximately 47 light-years beyond the galactic rim, there's a rogue planet moving through the void. Based on the biological evidence, it's been converted into a massive breeding facility, what we're calling the Genesis Site." Ambassador Tell of the Kelvari looked stunned. "You're proposing to leave the galaxy? To attack them in deep space? That's That's madness. No ship can survive in the void between galaxies. General Nash stepped forward, his expression grim. We've been building ships that can. Project Exodus has been running for 2 months, ever since we confirmed the location of the Genesis site. We're not just talking about defeating the current swarm. We're talking about ending the Nexari threat permanently. The ships of Exodus fleet were unlike anything humanity had built before. Massive vessels designed for extended operations in the void, equipped with advanced life support systems, resource processing facilities, and weapons. Systems specifically designed to destroy biological targets. They were less ships than mobile battle stations, each one capable of operating independently for decades. But the most controversial aspect of humanity's total war doctrine wasn't the ships. It was the weapons. Dr. Vega's team had developed what they called evolutionary viruses, synthetic organisms designed to attack Nexari biology at the genetic level. Unlike the crystalline infections, these weapons were specifically engineered to be completely lethal to Nexari organisms while being harmless to other forms of life. You're talking about genocide, said Ambassador Kresh of the Altarian Republic, his blue-scaled face twisted with disgust. Complete extermination of an entire species. Torres met his gaze without flinching. Yes, that's exactly what we're talking about. The Nexari have consumed 18 billion sentient beings in this galaxy alone. They've turned 17 thriving worlds into barren rock. They don't negotiate, they don't show mercy, and they don't stop until everything is dead. So yes, we're going to exterminate them completely. The debate raged for hours, but ultimately humanity didn't need the galactic community's approval. Earth's industrial capacity had reached wartime levels that staggered other species. Human space was producing more military hardware in a month than some civilizations built in a decade. The Exodus fleet launched 3 weeks later. 57 capital ships, each the size of a small city, escorted by hundreds of support vessels and fighter craft. They carried 30,000 human military personnel, along with volunteers from other species who had lost everything to the Nexari. Captain Dale commanded one of the fleet's heavy assault ships, the UES Vengeance. His crew was a mix of veterans, from the early battles and fresh recruits who had enlisted after seeing footage of liberated Nexari worlds. They all shared the same grim determination. This war would end with humanity's terms. The journey to the Genesis site took 4 months. As they traveled deeper into the void between galaxies, long-range sensors began detecting the true scope of the Nexari threat. The rogue planet wasn't just a breeding facility. It was surrounded by a massive swarm of bioships, a reserve force thousands of times larger than anything humanity had faced. Estimated enemy strength is over 10 million individual organisms, reported the fleet's chief intelligence officer. Bioships ranging from fighter-sized scouts to command vessels larger than our biggest dreadnoughts. Torres studied the tactical display with cold satisfaction. Perfect. We'll get them all in one place. The final approach began with long-range bombardment from humanity's most powerful weapons. Nuclear missiles with crystalline warheads carved paths of destruction through the outer swarm, while electromagnetic pulse weapons disrupted the Nexari, coordination networks across vast distances. But the real devastation came when the Exodus fleet deployed Dr. Vega's evolutionary viruses. Delivered by specially designed penetrator rounds, the synthetic organisms spread through the Nexari swarm like wildfire. Unlike their previous encounters with human weapons, the Nexari found they couldn't adapt to this threat. The viruses attacked their genetic structure directly, rewriting their DNA to make reproduction impossible. The Genesis site itself was a planet-sized mass of organic matter, covered in vast breeding chambers and processing facilities. Torres ordered the deployment of humanity's most terrible weapon, planet-killer warheads designed to crack worlds apart. As the rogue planet burned, its death throes sending waves of disruption through the surrounding swarm, Admiral Torres broadcast a message that would echo through galactic history. This is Admiral Torres of the human Exodus fleet. The Nexari threat has been eliminated. Any species, anywhere in the galaxy, that preys upon the innocent, that consumes the peaceful, that believes might makes right. Remember this day. Remember. What happens when you threaten those under humanity's protection? The return of the Exodus fleet to Kelvari space marked the end of the greatest war the galaxy had ever known. But victory came with a price that would reshape interstellar politics for generations to come. The celebration on Kelvari Prime was magnificent. Millions of beings from dozens of species gathered to welcome humanity's returning warriors. But beneath the festivities lay an uncomfortable truth. The galaxy now understood what humans were capable of when pushed to their limits. Admiral Torres stood on the observation deck of the orbital station, watching as her crews received their medals and commendations. Many ships were returning with empty berths, their crews lost in the final assault on the Genesis site. The human cost of total war had been significant, over 8,000 dead, with thousands more carrying wounds that would never fully heal. Dr. Vega joined her at the viewport, both women sharing the weight of what they had accomplished. The Galactic Council wants to classify our evolutionary viruses as weapons of mass destruction, Vega said quietly. There's talk of restrictions, regulations, maybe even sanctions. Torres smiled grimly. Let them talk. They were ready to let the Nexari consume half the galaxy, rather than risk a real fight. We did what needed to be done. The political aftermath was already becoming apparent. Species that had remained neutral during the Nexari crisis were now eager to establish trade, agreements and defense pacts with humanity. Others, particularly those with expansionist tendencies, were quietly reassessing their long-term plans. Captain Rex, now promoted to Commodore and commanding his own squadron, had become something of a folk hero among the merchant crews. His conversion from freight hauler to war hero embodied humanity's ability to transform civilians into warriors when necessity demanded it. The thing that scares them, Rex explained to his assembled crew, isn't our weapons or our ships. It's our willingness to do whatever it takes to protect what matters to us. They've never seen that before. A species that goes from peaceful, trading partner to galaxy-spanning war machine in a matter of months. The liberated Kelvari worlds were rebuilding with human assistance, but the scars would remain for generations. Entire ecosystems had been consumed, requiring massive terraforming, efforts to restore habitability. The psychological trauma ran even deeper. Survivors spoke of nightmares, of the sound of Nexari bioships moving through their skies. Ambassador Tell, now serving as the Kelvari representative to the Galactic Council, worked tirelessly to ensure that humanity's sacrifice was not forgotten. His speeches before the assembled delegates painted a stark picture of what would have happened without human intervention. 17 of our worlds were consumed, he said during one particularly memorable address. 6 billion of my people died before humanity answered our call for help. We were facing extinction, and the galactic community offered us sympathy and empty promises. Humanity offered us total war. But it was the discovery made by human scientists in the wreckage of the Genesis site that truly changed everything. Dr. Vega's analysis of the rogue planet's remains revealed evidence of previous invasions, genetic traces of species from other galaxies, consumed and incorporated into the Nexari's biological matrix. They've done this before, Vega reported to the emergency session of the Galactic Council. At least 6 times in the past million years, they've moved between galaxies, consuming everything in their path before moving on to the next target. We weren't just fighting for this galaxy. We were fighting for every galaxy they might have targeted next. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just won a war. They had prevented an extinction event that could have affected multiple galaxies over millions of years. The scope of their victory was almost incomprehensible. General Nash, now serving as Earth's military liaison to the galactic community, found himself fielding requests for human military advisors from dozens of species. The tactics and strategies developed during the Nexari War were being studied by military academies across the galaxy. They want to learn our methods, Nash reported to the Earth Defense Council. But they don't understand that our methods come from our nature. You can't teach another species to fight like humans fight, because other species don't think like humans think. The memorial services for the fallen were broadcast across human space and beyond. Each name was read aloud, each sacrifice acknowledged. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from an unexpected source. The children of the liberated worlds, who were already growing up in a galaxy where the Nexari were nothing more than a cautionary tale from history. As the months passed, and the immediate aftermath of victory settled into the routine of peace, one fact became clear to every species in the galaxy. Humanity was no longer the newcomer species looking for acceptance. They were the species that others looked to when the impossible needed to be accomplished. The galaxy had begged for help. Humanity had answered with total war, and in doing so, They had secured not just victory, but a new understanding of what it meant to be human among the stars. 5 years after the last Nexari bioship was destroyed, the galaxy had settled into a new equilibrium. Humanity's role had evolved from desperate ally to reluctant guardian, a position that brought both respect and wariness from the galactic community. The Memorial Garden on Luna had become a pilgrimage site for beings from across the galaxy. Visitors from dozens of species came to pay their respects to the human crews who had died fighting the Nexari. But more than that, they came to understand what had driven humanity to such extremes. Ambassador Tell, now elderly but still serving, as a bridge between humanity and the Kelvari Confederation, often served as a guide for these visitors. His words had become part of galactic history. They did not know us, had no obligation to us, received no reward for helping us. Yet when we begged for help, they gave us everything. Admiral Torres, now director of the Human Defense Initiative, oversaw a military force that had been transformed by the lessons of total war. Human fleets patrolled the galactic borders, watching for any sign of new threats from the void between galaxies. Their ships were fewer in number than during the war, but far more advanced, incorporating technology developed during the conflict. The Nexari War had accelerated human technological development by decades. Dr. Vega, now director of the Advanced Research Division, led teams that were pushing the boundaries of biological engineering, weapons technology, and defensive systems. But perhaps more importantly, they were also developing new methods of peaceful exploration and scientific advancement. The galaxy learned something about us during the war, Vega explained to a gathering of interspecies scientists. But we learned something about ourselves too. We discovered that our greatest strength isn't our weapons or our tactics. It's our refusal to accept defeat when something truly matters. The economic transformation had been equally dramatic. Human industrial capacity, expanded during the HFY War, now served peaceful purposes. Human-built space stations were being constructed throughout the galaxy, serving as neutral meeting grounds for diplomatic negotiations and trade agreements. The efficiency and reliability of human engineering had become legendary. Captain Rex, now Admiral Rex, and commanding the Merchant Protection Fleet, embodied humanity's dual nature. His ships were armed and ready for combat, but their primary mission was protecting trade routes and assisting vessels in distress. The same humans who had waged total war now served as the galaxy's unofficial rescue service. The political changes were perhaps the most significant. The Galactic Council had been restructured, with humanity holding a permanent seat and veto, power over major decisions. It was a recognition of reality. No major galactic policy could succeed without human support, and no threat could be ignored if humans deemed it significant. But with power came responsibility, and humanity found itself mediating disputes that had nothing to do with their interests. When the Regellian Empire attempted to expand into neutral space, a single human diplomatic vessel was enough to end the crisis. When pirates began raiding the outer colonies, human patrol fleets eliminated the threat within weeks. We never wanted to be the galaxy's police force, General Nash observed during a strategy briefing. But after the Nexari War, everyone expects us to solve their problems. The question is, do we have a choice? The answer came during the Centauri crisis, when long-range sensors detected an anomaly in the void beyond the galactic rim. For 3 tense weeks, every species in the galaxy waited to see if humanity would mobilize for another total war. The relief when the anomaly was identified as a natural phenomenon was palpable. "They're all afraid of us now," observed Commander Lisa Park, one of the war's youngest veterans. "They're grateful for what we did, but they're also terrified of what we might do." It was a burden that humanity carried with mixed feelings. They had saved the galaxy, but in doing so, they had revealed a capacity for violence that made other species deeply uncomfortable. The same traits that made humans effective warriors, their adaptability, their refusal to surrender, their willingness to make terrible sacrifices for their principles, also made them unpredictable allies. The children born after the war were growing up in a galaxy where humanity's protection was taken for granted. They attended integrated schools with alien classmates, learned about the Nexari conflict as ancient history, and dreamed of careers in exploration and science rather than warfare. Yet even in peacetime, the human military maintained its readiness. Training exercises simulated threats that existed only in imagination, preparing for enemies that might never come. The motto of the Human Defense Initiative, carved into the memorial wall on Luna, reflected this eternal vigilance. Never again. As Admiral Torres stood in her office, looking out at the star-filled void that humanity now helped protect, she reflected on the transformation of her species. They had answered a plea for help with total war, and in doing so, had become something new. Not just another species among many, but the guardians of galactic civilization. The galaxy had begged for help, and humanity had responded with everything they had. Now, years later, that response continued to echo through the stars. A reminder that some species, when pushed to their limits, discover not just what they can destroy, but what they are willing to sacrifice to protect. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through conquest or diplomacy, but through their willingness to fight total war for strangers who had nowhere else to turn. It was a legacy that would define their role in the galaxy for generations to come.